morning. Good morning, everyone. I enjoyed the first session, and I certainly hope that this one is as useful as what I witnessed earlier. But I'm here to talk to you all about some ancillary issues surrounding the abolishment of Louisiana's non-unanimous jury system. My presentation will proceed in three parts. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about the pre-2018 practices when it comes to race in jury in the state of Louisiana. So this is what we did before we ended non-unanimous juries first. The second part of the presentation will sort of explain how we did the work of ending these non-unanimous juries. And then finally, you will be surprised to hear that this issue remains with us. So there are lots of ancillary issues that never got resolved when these juries ended. And so that will be the final part of the presentation. And I'm happy to be able to share a lot of traction that is either in the form of legislation or court rules that are unfolding around the country. So there seems to be some precedent for change that we could follow here in the state, and I'm going to be offering that. Very informal presenter, so feel free to interrupt as you would like. And if you need a break, let me know that as well. We can pause when you're ready to pause. But I'm starting now, so you should be at the next slide, and I'm getting ready to do the intro part, which is sort of putting the context together about race and juries in Louisiana. There's just no way to really do a meaningful evaluation of these ancillary issues without looking at non-unanimous juries in their proper historical context. Doing that, unfortunately, is going to require us all to hit the rewind button and take this very painful journey all the way back to slavery, because this is really the genesis of this conversation. During that slavery era, people of color had no right to serve on a jury. They also had no right to have a jury. They didn't have the right to be tried in courts of law. What happened back then was they used these slave tribunals, and the jury were slave owners. And of course, we know the outcome, of course, of all of those cases. There was just no protection from the legal. Marginalized by operation of law until the year 1865. And then 1865, something magical happens, which is they're emancipated. And so we're getting ready to take a glimpse into that emancipation process. So if you can start the video, I'm going to ask you as you watch this video to not consider jury service from the present state with your present knowledge, but to consider jury service and the right to a jury trial from the standpoint of these people that you're going to see in these uniforms, in these military uniforms. You can start it.
On that island sits Fort Sumter. On April 12, 1861, a single mortar shell shattered the pre-dawn sky, and the United States, just 85 years old, erupted into all-out civil war. Initially, for President Abraham Lincoln, the war was about a single overriding goal: saving the Union from the forces of secession in the American South, forces that were threatening to tear the Republic apart.
There was a ditty that people used to sing around Union recruiting that I think sums up what Lincoln's original orientation was. It went something like, I stand for the Union, all its foes I abhor. I ain't for the N-word, but I am for the war.
Soon after the war began, its focus began to change when enslaved African Americans, forced to work in the Confederacy's defense, escaped behind Union lines.
Escaped slaves who run away to Union lines are called contraband. And what Union policymakers, including Lincoln, begin to recognize is this creates a welcome disruption among the Southern slaveholders. This deprives them of their property, it shuts down their plantations, and it makes their war effort more difficult.
The swelling numbers of contraband pushed President Lincoln to see that the Civil War was actually about abolishing the institution of slavery, ultimately leading him to issue the Emancipation Proclamation.
In many ways, the Emancipation Proclamation is, first and foremost, a military policy. it's not clear the Union is winning the war before the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation also gives these escaped slaves the opportunity to serve in the Union Army. This is crucial to the Union's success in the war effort.
With the freedom of their people at stake, almost 200,000 black men enlisted in the Union Army and Navy, playing a pivotal role in bringing victory to the North.
The key element that changed the outcome of this war in terms of who won it and in terms of what it was about were the slaves themselves. Their determination that this war was going to be about the end of slavery. Masses of self-liberated slaves became the wave that the Union would ultimately ride to victory.
So what the video didn't depict is people who were freed. The video actually showed people who took freedom. And that's a very different narrative. The video shows us people who were extremely patriotic, people who had great optimism in this American dream, people who were a marginalized population, finally enthusiastic about the idea of inclusion. And then Abraham Lincoln is killed, and we enter Reconstruction with no presidential support for the transition of these emancipated people. But we do have Congress willing to help. Congress wants badly to ensure their inclusion into American society, and so we get these Reconstruction amendments. In 1868, Congress gives us the 14th Amendment, which is to convert these pieces of property, this contraband, over into citizens. And it tells them that they are equal, which means they will not be marginalized in this country anymore. It tells them that they're going to enjoy now life as an American citizen. And Congress goes on in 1870 to give them the 15th Amendment, which guarantees that they have a right to vote that will not be taken. Now, what's important is at this hour, people of color are embracing citizenship. So they're actively voting, they're seeking employment, they're gainfully interested in serving on juries, they want to be educated. And so it is incorrect when we say that Reconstruction ended. What is correct is that it was actually abandoned. And once it was abandoned, these very people that received all of these grand promises from Congress now revert back to this life of marginalization. And so on a very typical day at this point in Reconstruction, we see these people now over-policed. We see them frequently being arrested, not because they are breaking the law, but because we have an active convict leasing system that needs their bodies. So once again, they begin to be commodities in this country. They are victims of labor exploitation. They're experiencing voter suppression, domestic terrorism, violence, lynching daily. But most importantly for our purposes, exclusion now from the very jury service that Congress just enacted through federal legislation as a guarantee to them that they would get. So they feel now, just a matter of years from being emancipated, that they're back in a system of chattel slavery. So when we think of jury service in Louisiana, most legal professionals, most court officials think that people of color are simply unwilling, uninterested in the process of participating in juries. So I want us to think about, has that always been the case? There's so much evidence to the contrary. So if you look at this screen, which the one that you just had, if you don't mind, go back. What you're going to see, this is only a glimpse, and it's overwhelming. This is not an accurate picture of how many attempts people of color have made either to have the right to a jury trial that is constitutional or to be a participant in the jury process. This is troubling because if you look at the date, it is prolonged and it is consistent. And these are the cries of people of color to be a part of the jury box. So now I want to talk to you about this 1870 reference here. Keep in mind, this is only 5 years after freedom. 5 years after we've emancipated. What are people doing in 1870? These newly emancipated people are on a campaign writing letters to Congress in 1870 saying, Congress, you gave us these rights to be on juries, but they won't allow it. This is black folks who are asking to be on juries, the very people that we believe have no interest in being a part of that service. So Congress is trying to help, and what do? They give us the Civil Rights Act of 1875. That sounds like an old law, but that should alarm everyone, because guess what that law says? It is illegal in this country to use race as a factor to stop someone from sitting on a jury. It's a crime, by the way, so that means somebody should be punished for taking that right from a citizen of color, and this is 10 years after freedom. So you can see that it wasn't apathy or lack of interest. It was systemically that they were not being allowed to serve. But these people still want citizenship, so what do? They resort to getting into the newspaper. So if you look at 1876, you see editorials where black citizens are writing op-eds saying, hey, I want to sit on a jury. 1880, we get this landmark Strata versus West Virginia case, where it is not black folks that are not showing up for the jury in 1880. If you look, it is state law that says you can't come, right? So they sue. Why? Because they want to participate. In 1886, guess what Homer Plessy's doing? He's not sitting in the back of the rail car like you may think, but in 1886, he's sitting in the room with the Justice Protective Educational and Social Club. And what are they doing in New Orleans in 1886? They are arguing that there's no equal protection in segregation, and they're fashioning strategies to do what? Not the rail car at this point. They're fighting Jim Crow juries. Imagine that. Louis A. Martinet, I think when I saw you last, I was an invitation from Louis A. Martinet. He's in the room with Homer Plessy in 1895 with the Citizens Committee. And if you read those minutes, it will just give you chills. The energy in the room of these black activists in the 80s trying to organize strategies to combat what they termed the Jim Crow jury. 1947, look at the slide. Guess what the NAACP is doing? They're tired of going to courts of law in the United States, so they go to the whole United Nations. And guess what the grievance is over? Black folks being denied the right to sit in the jury box. 1948, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois is expressing these same grievances that black people want to serve on juries and they can't. By 1954, we have now people of Mexican descent joining the chorus, arguing that they too are being oppressed. By 1961, the United States Civil Rights Commission is acknowledging a pattern from the genesis of freedom in this country of excluding blacks from the jury. 1968, Louisiana wants to take a man's liberty and don't even give him the right to a jury trial, so that has to be brought before the Supreme Court. And by the way, Gary Duncan lives anonymously still in the state, unknown for the piece of history he has made in Duncan versus Louisiana. This is a black man whose life was on the line and he fought to change law. 1972, Oregon, and 1972, Louisiana both get decisions out of the Supreme Court on the same day. This Johnson versus Louisiana decision becomes important for our later discussion of the 1974 Constitutional Convention, so make note of it. But what I want you to recognize from this slide is that there has been litigation and agitation from emancipation to the present moment for black people to have the right to sit on juries, and for black people to have their freedom decided by a jury of their peers. So this idea that we're not interested is a false narrative, and I want to be sure that we deconstruct that. Now, I want us to think about those men in the uniforms in the video. Having heard this, imagine having put up that fight to be a part of a country, and this is what awaited them after that civil rights battle. And I'm trying to be sure that we have this historical understand that law has made promises to people of color that it has refused to keep. And this is a documented fact. So what has happened to people of color with this jury justice issue is a lack of access before emancipation, a lack of access after emancipation, and alarmingly, a lack of access after Louisiana has changed this non-unanimous jury law. So this ultimately has reduced all of these cases and agitation to 4 scenarios that we're going to be talking about. One is just the idea you don't get a jury. That's been an obstacle that we've had to overcome. 2 is that you're going to not be called into the jury pool in your proper proportion in the community. That's an obstacle we're going to talk about. 3, you get to get into the jury box, but we just marginalize you by way of ignoring your reasonable doubt. That was the non-unanimous jury system. And then the last issue, which we'll talk about extensively, is you get past all those obstacles. You get called in and you get to the jury box only at that point to be struck later because of race. So all the time what we've had on record, if you go to the next slide, and please don't ever forget this, the length of time we've had the Civil Rights Act of 1875, the length of time that we've had state law regulating jury discrimination, the length of time we've had federal law regulating jury discrimination, all of that predated non-unanimous juries. And tragically, all of it has outlived the end of non-unanimous juries. So why, in my research, I have often tried to understand, was there this unwillingness to allow Black people to have this access? And what I realized is in the South, there was this idea that the jury box is a site of power. It's a site of prestige. It's almost like for this one moment that I'm in that jury box, I'm holding a public office. I get to decide things that are really significant, like what happens to you for the rest of your life. And so we do not want that power sharing in the South. And so researchers have termed this idea the notion that Blacks are just simply inept to be an arbiter of the life or the liberty or property of a white man. So Southern juries became the site of a continuation of white domination over Blacks. Now, is there a point to this? Do I just want to throw all this race stuff out? Absolutely not. There is a point. And if you go to the next slide, the point is for us to come to terms with this idea of institutional racism. So to help us understand that in the South, juries have been living manifestations of institutional racism. And what do I mean by institutional racism? I've provided my best definition on the slide, but it's the idea that there's a cumulative and compounding effects of a bunch of social factors that systemically privileges one dominant group and disadvantages individuals of a marginalized group. And when it comes to juries, whether it be for either the accused person or the juror themselves, Blacks have an unparalleled experience, and it would be irresponsible and dishonest of me to talk to you about non-unanimous juries as if they are not attached to this history. Now, there are ancillary issues, and they must be evaluated in these contours. That is important. And so I'll now move on to screen 2 and talk to you a little bit, now that you understand that context, how did this system come to an end? Well, the media started covering this around 2018, but the effort started about 3 years prior to that. And it started with the core group of about 6 folks who simply just wanted to see an end to this for various reasons. So you're going to see a film that details all of this in a second, but there was one point that you should understand going into this. The group of us didn't have a unanimous agreement about how to end the system. So I was a strong believer that this had to be corrected in the legislature simply because we are civilian jurisdiction. And in my mind, that is why we have a civilian jurisdiction, because you should be at the legislature. There were a number of us who said that is not correct, it won't happen there, and they were strong advocates of litigation. So we all agreed to disagree, and everybody did what their talent allowed. And in the end, we all feel like we won because it happened both at the legislature and through litigation. So I'm going to give you this video. It's a 15-minute, very good overview of what happened, but also in your materials, the 64 Parishes Encyclopedia of Louisiana just chronicled this history, so you also have a written version, but I'm going to let her show the video so you can sort of see the process of getting this done.
By Paris headlines to begin in Lafayette, where lawmakers and members of law enforcement, past and present, are rallying in support of the unanimous jury amendment on the November ballot. Right now, Louisiana is one of only 2 states in the U.S. where unanimous juries are not needed to convict a suspect. Supporters of the amendment say the current law is un-American.
This is about liberty, justice, and fairness. And if you love the Constitution and you love the Bill of Rights and you love the liberty that we are guaranteed by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then you will want to vote for amendment number 2.
When it comes to Louisiana's non-unanimous jury system, we have a narrative. And the narrative goes something like this. Because the United States Supreme Court has not rendered the system unconstitutional, it is somehow legal, and because it is legal, it is not harmful. I'm here today to deconstruct the narrative and to talk to you about the counter-narrative, which is so very important as we search for justice in the state of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John DeRosier, District Attorney, Calhoun Parish. I've heard a lot about this system being adopted as a result of a vestige of slavery. I have no reason to doubt that. I'm not proud of that. That's the way it started. But it is what it is. However, ladies and gentlemen, that was 138 years ago. We have 2 constitutional conventions since then, one in 1974, that have not changed the concept of unanimous versus non-unanimous. When I was 13, I said, Daddy, what's a conservative? He said, well, son, the best way I can define that is, a conservative is a person who, when he gets ready to change something, he looks at what he's getting ready to change to make sure it is better than what he's got already. So I would suggest to you, that is the issue that we're here about today.
If you like the 1957 film classic 12 Angry Men, then you'll love Louisiana's version, 10 Angry Men. Simpler and faster. This Bayou blockbuster has been packing them into the big house for over 119 years. 10 Angry Men was a vestige of the notorious Louisiana Constitutional Convention of 1898. This black and white classic features a conviction conveyor belt so efficient it's still in existence today. Shocking, savage, explosive. We know they're guilty because 83% of jurors reached a unanimous decision. Hell, you ain't got to pass the bar to throw folks behind them. 10 Angry Men, a Jim Crow production.
Was all the right people. It was all the right people. It did though, it really did. And I have no doubt, like I cannot conceive of anything happening except victory tonight. Like I feel that convicted about it.
I ain't saying nothing until
Did you give you a preliminary a little bit before?
probably nobody.
pause right quick and I'm gonna give you mine. Come on, he's gonna take off fix it and then I'll send it.
When you have non-unanimous jury verdicts, those deliberation processes are actually verdict-driven. When you require unanimity, those deliberation processes are actually evidence-driven. When it's just non-unanimous, they're going to take a quick count and see how close they are to 10. And if they have their 10, then boom, they can go give their verdict and then be done. So y'all are here in Louisiana. A lot of people don't know that it's one of the prison capitals of the world, but it is something that should offend everybody in this room. One of the most dangerous phrases we have is we've always done it this way. So why are you trying to change this system? A system that they think works. And so when somebody tries to tell you that we've always done this way as their justification to continue to do it, don't accept that.
I am so utterly offended for you to start your comments and say, I know that this recruiting is slavery, but it is what it is. And I needed you to hear that from me. And I wish you would look at me while I'm speaking with you, because I think I deserve that kind of respect after you just disrespected me on this committee. You are elected to represent everybody, and to admit that it started in slavery and say it is what it is. I hope the people of your parish are listening. And if they aren't, I'm going to make sure that they know what you said today. I am utterly offended. They listen. And for you not to even look at me in my face, this is a problem.
No, Mr.
I don't need your apology.
Hold up, guys.
So when you walk into that 1898 Constitutional Convention, you would have noticed that the participants were all white males.
There were around 138 white delegates trying to decide what they were going to do with this newly freed slave population.
These quotes are not just from anybody, and you should know the first one is from Mr. Thomas Sims, who was the chair of the Judiciary Committee.
We looked at the transcript, and they were very clear about their intentions of the Constitutional Convention.
And I quote to you, "The work we have done should be crowned as worthy. In all states, those in power seek to maintain it. Our mission was to establish the supremacy of the white race in this state to the extent which it could be done legally and constitutionally." Those are the words of the chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
How can you say that you've been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt when two people on the jury don't think you're guilty? This is a liberty issue. Why have we been deprived of the full protection of the Sixth Amendment? Why? Why is Mississippi ahead of us on this? Hello, I'm Ed Tarpley. Yes, and what is your name? Well, nice to meet you. Yes, indeed. And who's over here? Hey, Karen. Ed Tarpley. Good to see you. Lenny's my old buddy from college. We go a few years back. That's right.
If I remember over at the donut shop, he was against the new deals.
That's right. I've softened up a little since then. Unanimity is the critical and crucial part of the jury trial protection. Without unanimity, you don't have the full protection of the right to trial by jury.
When we did the very first non-unanimous jury talk in the year 2015, the advocate was in our audience. And after that talk, I met with those reporters at the advocate to talk to them about how they might be able to help gather data. And it took them 8 months of collecting the data. We should all know now that they've released their findings in the series called Tilting the Scale. It is quite compelling, and it is one of the things that I think got this successfully through the legislation. Without that series, there were people like myself who was given anecdotal thoughts,
once that series came out, it was documented with data, and you just can't refute those numbers. Oh, I'm so glad. Very glad they helped. Very glad. Every time I speak, I get thrown off the stage. I'm so used to it right now. I can go on and on and on with this, so thank you all so much for entertaining this. And if you have questions, you have my email address.
I tell folks all the time, it wasn't happening.
Well, it was not just me. It was so many people, and I cannot tell you that. But I was like the bulldog, sending emails and wouldn't stop until we got.
I mean, nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
So you've been preaching the good word to your classmates.
Well, listen, I am just a messenger, and without all the army that got this word out, it wouldn't have happened. So listen, we're gonna all go down in history for doing this work. And when this smoke come in, I'm gonna get on the dance floor and I'm gonna turn off.
It really brought together people from all points of the political spectrum. I mean, here's a conservative Republican former prosecutor like myself, and Angela, she's a professor at Southern Law School, and Marjorie was executive director at ACLU at the time. Well, that's a pretty unusual mix of people right there. I think the real untold story was the leadership of the Louisiana Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. They had decided early in the year to make this a priority item for their legislative package. And they had actually approached me and asked me if I would testify in the committees. And I agreed to do so.
I'm going to yield my opening to the gentleman on my left, and I will reserve my comments for closing.
Thank you, Senator Morrell. Good morning, committee. It's an honor to be here. This is a very important and historic piece of legislation because I would venture to say that in our lifetime, we will never face another opportunity like this. The opportunity to repeal a 138-year-old law that goes back to the Jim Crow era of Louisiana.
First of all, I want to address the white elephant in the room straight up. I know that this bill, there's a lot of talk about the racist element of it. Up front, I'm not a racist. I deplore racism. I've been against racism my entire life. I may be the only district attorney in Louisiana that put a white man on death row for killing an African American, and he's still there. Juries don't represent groups of people. That's what you as legislators do. Jurors are picked. Hopefully, they will apply the law to the facts. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. People get on juries with agendas, and it cuts both ways.
I wanted to know why the DA's Association hasn't taken a position. Are you aware of why they haven't done so?
Yes, sir. We as an organization never take positions when we have one or two members, three, that are opposed. We have people for reasons, and I'm not here to speak for them about their reasons. But when we don't have virtually 100%, we don't take a position, and that's what happened in this particular situation.
The DA's Association did not take a position because you all couldn't get a unanimous decision. Is that right? Let me see if I got, because I heard you say 2 or 3.
In closing, let me just say this. We should not be defined by this. We have come so far. This type of thing holds our state back. I appreciate your time listening to all this, and I would sincerely hope that y'all will vote to move this bill favorably as amended. Thank you.
Representative James has moved to report SB 243 as amended favorable. Is there any objection? Committee, I want to commend you. There's no objection. Congratulations, sir.
You can stop it. So the point was for you to see that it was a lot of years of getting out to the community and helping the community understand what was going on with these juries. And what surprised me was when I started the research, I really thought the problem was the racist history of the law. Then I got an invitation to go out to Angola to speak to the guys about what we were trying to do at the legislature, and Angola would only allow into the session those folks who were convicted by these non-unanimous juries. So when I got there and realized that about half of these folks are not black, then I realized this is not really just a race issue. This is something deeper than that. In that room I witnessed that day, and that led me to go back and rethink the power of the research. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But what was important to me is to begin to help people understand that this did have a racist history, but because of the way we fund our justice system and because of the speed that it moves, it started to engulf people of all races. It's a poor person's issue, is actually what it became. So you saw how the legislative piece happened. Now I quickly want to tell you a little bit about that advocate data. There was a case out of New Orleans right before the vote, so around 2017, and it was the Christopher Lee ruling. Advocate approached me and said, you know, how can we help? And so one of the things that I was able to share with them was that, you know, we're doing this community work, and when we were talking to people, there were a lot of people who just believed me because I'm Professor Bell, but there were many more people who said, where's your proof? And we don't have any. And then, of course, so we're running into this challenge in the community needing data, and then the lawyers in the court needed the data. So once that study was completed by the advocate, and it took almost a year to get that done, that study was the weapon that was used in the Melvin Maxey litigation. And so Maxey didn't get a lot of coverage, and it was deliberate, and I'll tell you why, but it was filed in 2016, and it challenged in Natchitoches this system as being unconstitutional. Maxey is the first ruling we get out of Louisiana that actually declared this system unconstitutional, but it comes the week of the vote. And so we made a very tactical decision not to tell the public about Maxey because we were very fearful that if people heard the ruling, they would just not go vote. And then if it got overturned, we're back with this law. So it's a little unfair to those attorneys because they really did, historically, the first ruling that changed this, but their ruling only happened because of the Christopher Lee ruling that denied it and gave the roadmap, and then the advocate supplying the missing data. And so I just want to mention that this really was overturned in part because of the legislature and in part because of that Maxey litigation. So now I'm ready to move on to the final piece, which is the most valuable for you all, which is all of these ancillary issues and what can be done about them. So one of the things that I want you to look at, if you'll move to the slide with the jury, I'm just wondering as you look at this slide, given the conversation we're having today, if anything about this slide just strikes you as a little bit concerning. Given the conversation we've had today, does anything about the slide seem a little concerning? So we see an all-white jury. So that is our first ancillary issue, which is that we were fighting for 12, and we got 12, as you see, but the communications that I've been getting consistently since 2018 from lawyers in federal and state court is that, Professor Bell, the 12 we're getting are all white people. And so now we have a new problem because we're getting 12 and they're not diverse. Now, why is that important? What is important about all of this, I don't think ever really got told to the public during the campaign, which is the power of that deliberative research. So let's talk about that. In 1972, when the Supreme Court of the United States issued that Apodaca ruling, that was a question of whether it's okay to have 11 or 10, or do you really need 12? And in the court's analysis, the court said, look, all you need is to get folks in the jury box, and all you need is for those folks to listen, and that's good enough to be a deliberation. We didn't know any better in 1972 because there was no research. But that Apodaca ruling inspired amazing research on the deliberative process, and it tells us some things now that tells us Apodaca was wrong. one of the first things we learn is that when a group needs to make a decision, if the group is all the same, not all the same race, not all the same gender, that's not what I mean. I mean all the same perspectives, all the same experience, you're going to get a rushed decision and it's going to be flawed. So we know that when you can diversify by experience, when you can diversify by age, by gender, by geography, all of those things end up slowing the process down. Why? Because people's experiences and perspectives cause them to evaluate information differently. And so people are going to ask questions based on their experiences. And during that questioning process, people can sometimes then correct misunderstandings. They can also go back and measure inaccurate statements. And so what we're finding is that if the juries are all the same people, then we're not getting a process that is any more credible than we got when we had this non-unanimous jury system. So this research is compelling. And now the question is, why is this jury all white? And so I have, for the last 2 years, I've been doing talks in the community about this. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we did them by Zoom. So they're all on YouTube, and we titled them, is Black Folks Missing in Action, or are they missing by practice? And what we've been doing is trying to use it as a tool to teach the community about this science and how their presence can shape these decisions and make these decisions more meaningful. But one of the first issues that I am finding that is causing this lack of representation is the use of these strikes. And it is not just the peremptory strikes, it is the cause strikes as well. But when we talked a minute ago about Maxie is the greatest example of how this happens. So I want to talk to you about the strikes that were used in Maxie. There was a black male juror in this Maxie case who the white male prosecutor struck. And he said the reason I'm striking him, he didn't state the reason on the record, but the defense attorney overheard him say, it's because he's stupid. He's too stupid. That's what he said. And then when it's time for him to present the race-neutral reason to the court, he tells the court it's something about his demeanor. It's just something about the way he's answering the questions. I just didn't like the way he's handling himself in the jury box. That's his race-neutral reasons. The trial judge says, well, that certainly sounds race-neutral to me. And the trial judge decides that that was not a race reason. And as a result, that juror was struck. Now, what that trial judge did not know is that there's a particular history about race and intelligence in the South. During slavery, there were medical doctors who they became almost expert celebrities in the South, but they would advance these theories. The one that comes to mind is Dr. Cartwright, Samuel Cartwright, who would go around to all of the plantations between Louisiana and Mississippi, and he treated the enslaved folks for these severe injuries because they didn't get medical care unless they were severe. But Dr. Cartwright had so much respect amongst these slave owners that they started consulting with him, and he started researching and writing these theories. And one of his theories he wrote was that if somebody houses you and they feed you and they give you clothes and you still want to run away, you have to be mentally ill. And so he calls that drapetomania. And it is published, and he's gone all around the country teaching this theory of drapetomania, which is black people are mentally ill, right? Because they're not happy being taken good care of on these plantations. And then he also advances the notion that we're intellectually inferior, and that science left the plantation and it fueled the whole movement of segregation down south. That became a rationalization for distinguishing and othering people of color down south, but that all stems from that slavery science. But guess what happens? Sooner or later it gets into the jury box. So we have one recorded case of a judge in 1895 in Louisiana, in New Orleans, who goes on the record and says, yeah, I'm excluding blacks from the jury. You know why? Because they lack intelligence and they lack moral standing. By the way, the 1898 Constitutional Convention, which is where this law got changed, that language appears there again, where they say we're trying to remove all of the corrupt and illiterate black voters because it was a voter suppression constitution as well. What these attorneys did post-trial in Maxey is something all defendants don't get, because the Capital Assistance Center has resources and they had an investigator. So they were able to go out and investigate and build the case. And guess what they find out about the stupid juror? He's a high school graduate. Unlike many of the whites who were able to sit on the jury, they weren't high school graduates. He had studied welding. He had learned to play a musical instrument. He performed in a band. He was a deacon in church who regularly taught the Bible. He had served on another jury in that same parish. He had a 30-year career in a plant as a trim operator. And so post-trial, when they go back on with this information, the court reverses itself and says, you know what? That is discrimination. Now, I just wrote my first book about race and justice, and I've done some research about some of the race-neutral reasons that prosecutors in Louisiana are offering to courts. Listen to some of these. Being a single black male with no children. That is a race-neutral reason. Enjoying rap music. Being a smartass. Being Baptist. Being the only juror wearing shorts on the first day of voir dire. Being employed at a casino. Looking like a drug dealer. Wearing gold jewelry and a t-shirt. Now, if you take a look at the next slide, Justice Johnson has given us some insights here that I think are worth considering relative to these Batson challenges. But as long as these Batson challenges go unignored, what they are doing is preventing jurors of color from participating in the same way jurors of color were prevented by Louisiana's non-unanimous jury system. So that remains one of the lingering issues, but there are solutions. And I'm giving two, and it's not one or two, it is one and two. So one is there needs to immediately be some credible cultural competency training for all judges, not just trial judges, because some of this has to be reviewed on appeal. Yes?
I need a point of clarification. The examples that you gave, were those race-neutral reasons given subsequent to a Batson challenge?
Correct. That's what was stated on the record when asked, what is your race-neutral reason? Correct. And so when I looked at all of these cases, it is clear that there are judges who don't have the cultural competency training to recognize some of these subtleties. So that would be my first suggestion, that there needs to be credible, not just trial judges who have to make these determinations, but appellate judges who have to review them as well. And also, I am so inspired by Rule 37. So if you look in your material, this, I am just blown away by this. This, I think, is a solution that could be considered by Louisiana. And this is a rule that does not come from the legislature. I have it labeled as page 5 in my materials. It doesn't come from the legislature. That's what I love about this. This is a Supreme Court rule. But guess what this rule does? Listen to this. It outlaws peremptory challenges based on implicit, institutional, and unconscious race and ethnic bias. So this is an attempt to get around any of these race-neutral reasons. They also go so further. Look at Section C. Section C allows the judge to actually raise the objection if the judge is witnessing what appears to be bias or racism in the court. Also, Section E is a very important section. It requires courts to evaluate the reasons that prosecutors give, and it requires the judge, listen to this language, to determine if an objective observer could view race or ethnicity as a factor. And then I love Section G, because G actually gives the court some insights to consider if they don't have that cultural competency training. So G tells the court, hey, look at the questions being posed to that juror. Look at whether all the jurors are getting that same question or just that jurors of that color. All of G is the kinds of things that would trigger an alert to the court. But then it goes on to give presumptively invalid reasons here. Some of those are if the person says, I had prior contact with law enforcement, I don't trust law enforcement, I live in a high crime neighborhood. All of those reasons are listed. I'm on pages 5 and 6 of your materials to give the judge an alert that you might be dealing with something that is pretextual here. And also, there's some traction around the country on this.
I apologize. Where is this from?
This is from Washington State. And this is the Supreme Court, so this is not the legislature. Oh, yeah, oh boy, this would be a dream to see this happen in Louisiana. Yeah, it's Washington Supreme Court, but I mean, imagine how easy that would be to do if the Supreme Court would adopt this. But California was inspired by this. So in 2020, California adopted the same legislation, but they even expanded it further. So California presumes all strikes to be invalid if the reason for the strike is based on appearance or demeanor. Now think about Maxie, right? This would have handled that problem. Or if somehow it is dealing with work-related issues like that, I work in a casino thing, California presumes that to be invalid. 2021, Arizona saw this and adopted it, but they went even further. Guess what Arizona did? They've abolished all peremptory strikes in civil and criminal cases. So you can sort of see that there is a movement around the country to honor the Sixth Amendment, and we are still not doing anything about the abuses of these strikes, and that is a big obstacle that undermines all of that work and all of that energy you all saw in that room that night. You know, we were all so excited thinking we had just accomplished something, and it's being undermined as long as this is allowed to happen.